All right, so the questions that we didn't get a chance to go over on Friday there. Okay, what processes or properties are used in both intracellular transport and transport in multicellular organisms? How are they used? Donna, can I just get you to turn off that front light switch? Thank you. Okay, now, what's the main process that plants were using to draw water up the plant that's used in a single cell as well? Osmosis. Okay, how does it work? Well, as water evaporates from the stomates, it leaves salts behind in the spongy layer of the leaf. Okay, those salts create an imbalance that has to be balanced by osmosis, and that osmosis begins to move water, okay, through the xylem into the spongy layer in order to balance the salts, and that creates an osmotic pulling force that draws water up the plant. Okay, water being polar allows it to hydrogen bond to itself in the small tubes of the xylem and be drawn upwards. Okay, number 2, if you were tapping a maple tree to harvest sap for syrup, which transporting tissue would you tap? So we got xylem or phloem. Which one is going to carry sugary sap? The phloem. Okay, and that means that the tube you put into the tree is not going in very far. Okay, it's not like you have to hammer it in and drive it halfway through the tree. If you do that, all it's going to come out is water. All right, well, like salty water, but okay, you probably don't want to put that on your pancakes. You want the sugary stuff that's moving down by gravity, okay? And so you want to tap that part and have the sugary sap come out. Incidentally, this is also a very fragile part of the tree, right? You can kill a tree if you ring it, okay? And ringing it, I mean cutting into it maybe about, let's say, 3-4 centimeters, okay? If you cut into a tree 3-4 centimeters all the way around the tree, you'll kill it. Right? Why? Right. You've just severed the phloem. All right. And now the roots cannot be supplied with sugar that's being produced in the leaves, and the roots will starve. Okay. When the roots starve, they can no longer absorb any water, okay, and carry out any cellular respiration, and the tree dies. Okay. Now, I tell you this because I know that it does work. When I was in university, we used to have this kind of field behind our dorm where we could, play football and run around and do whatever. And then the forestry department transplanted these big mature trees into this field, and that kind of was inconvenient for us. We had a guy who was in the forestry department. He said, well, we can take care of that. And we went out one night and we ringed all these trees. And we thought, all right, sweet, these trees are going to die, and then we'll have to cut them down. We'll get our field back. No. They came back and they used paper mache to graft across the phloems on all these trees that we'd ringed. Okay, you could actually see on the trees for a couple of years after, even still the cartoons, okay, and the print on the paper mache that they had grafted across these rings that we had made on the tree, and it actually worked. Okay, now there were some other ingredients. Obviously, it wasn't just paper mache, but it looked like paper mache. Okay, and it was kind of like a skin graft over that cut. Okay, and it allowed the plant to actually continue to transport sap down to the roots. So I guess you can't outsmart the tree muggers. Okay. That's what we called them anyway. The forestry guys were tree muggers, not tree huggers. Although in that case, they were clearly tree huggers, and we were the tree muggers. But what do you do? Okay. So, incidentally, don't do that. It's not nice. Okay. Number 3, in the leaf. Why are so many cells packed together near the surface of the leaf? Right, maximize photosynthesis. The more cells you have there, the more chloroplasts you have there, the more photosynthesis is going on. Okay, so that we want to pack them in as tight as possible. Now, how are they continually supplied with water? Well, right underneath them is what layer? Remember what the layer under the palisade layer was called? A spongy layer, and in the spongy layer is where the xylem comes in. Okay, the xylem and the phloem both come in there. Well, the xylem supplies water to the spongy layer, and then from the spongy layer it can diffuse into the cells in the palisade layer. All right. Would a plant be able to transport water to its leaves more easily or less easily on a humid day? Less easily. Okay? If it's really humid, what is there a lot of in the air? Water. Okay, so if there's lots of water vapor in the air, diffusion says it'll be more difficult for water to evaporate from the leaves and get into the air because there's already lots of water in the air. Now, granted, there's always going to be more water in the leaf than there is in the air, but it is going to slow that process down a bit. All right, everyone follow me on that? Okay, what if you put a plant underwater? It'll drown. Okay, why? Water can't evaporate from the leaves if it is submerged. Okay, water has to be able to go into a gaseous form, and it can't do that when it's underwater. Okay, as a terrestrial plant, obviously algae, they don't have that problem. All right, but terrestrial plants with only having the stomates for stuff to get out in and out of, okay, water will flood in through the stomates and it ruins the whole process. All right. You have a plant that does not look very full, so it only has a few stringy branches here or there. Okay, what would you do to give it a more full appearance? Right. Okay, prune it. Okay, trim it back to where all the buds are, and that will allow those buds to grow from further back, and you'll get more branches, giving it a more full appearance. Okay, if you want something to get tall, then you don't want to do that. Okay, if you want it to be tall and skinny, don't trim it. Okay, if you want it to look shorter and fuller, trim it. Okay, questions on any of those? All right, perfect. All right, so we got to look over today is plant growth and development, because tomorrow we're going to be working on a couple of things. Okay, we're going to be working on first off, our plant transport lab. So I'll bring in a plant, because I don't think those have enough leaves on them anymore. Okay, that we will hack up and do kind of a little lab with food coloring and stuff to see how water is transported through the plant and exactly where it goes in the leaf as it is transported through. That lab typically takes 2 or 3 days. Not that we'll be working on it, because basically you'd be sitting there watching the plant. That we don't have to do that. We just set it up and kind of leave it, okay, and look at it once a day for a couple of days. Take a picture of it each day. All right, and we'll see where the dye ends up at, okay, in the plant. The other thing we're going to be doing is designing a lab that we're not actually going to perform. We just design the procedure, okay, to test the effect of various factors on plant growth. So what we need to go over here are what are some factors that affect plant growth. Well, what are the obvious ones? The amount of light it gets, water, soil it's in. Okay, those I would say are the big ones. All right, composition of gases in its atmosphere would probably be another one. Not that that's something we can easily change, but it certainly does affect them. Okay. In regards to light, what are some things about light we might be able to change? Artificial versus natural, for sure. What else? Time exposed per day. Where it's being exposed to the light. How bright the light is, intensity, okay, color. All right, you might find that certain colors of light actually make a plant grow better. What color of light do you suppose would work best? That's what everyone thinks, but actually no. Plants are green because they reflect green light. Okay? Whatever color you see on something, that's the color of light being reflected back off. All right? So what colors are probably being absorbed most by the plant? Red, yeah. Okay, they really like red and orange, all right, things like that. All right, the colors we don't see are the ones that are typically being absorbed the most. So your greens and yellows and a little bit of blues are the ones that the plants like the most, okay, as opposed to the ones that we don't see on a plant. All right, so we need to understand what factors influence the growth of a plant. There's two classes that those factors can fall into, okay, and those are abiotic, which means non-living, and biotic, which means living. So the effect of other organisms on the plant. Okay, we're going to learn what hormones are responsible for growth and development in plants, okay, and understand that plant shape is not fixed, but it is a result of environmental factors and growth responses, okay? So plants make hormones, right? They're just different than ours. Okay, so plants have a problem that we don't have, and that is wherever they grow, they're stuck there. They cannot move. They're not Ents. This is not Tolkien or Lord of the Rings or anything like that. They can't pick up and go when things are not good for them. Okay, so they have to adapt to the conditions in their environment, okay, in other ways. As an animal, if our environment is not good, we pick up and go somewhere else. All right. Now, that may mean that a plant encounters hardships. Okay? And how can a plant adapt? What are some ways a plant could adapt to its surroundings? Yeah, it can grow more to one side if it needs to. Okay, what else? Now that could be any part of the plant, right? That could be leaves or roots, right? It could make roots only go to one side if there was maybe like a spring on one side of the plant and rocks on the other. It might only grow roots on one side or more roots on one side. Okay, could it store more energy maybe if it had the ability to do so in other places of the plant? Yeah, okay, like if you're talking about a potato or a carrot, they might store more energy at different times. Okay, they could just go dormant. Okay, if they're in a time of stress, they may just go dormant until conditions improve. They could grow, right? If it's competing for sunlight, certainly could grow leaves in the direction where light is most available, usually up. Okay, trying to shade out its competition. Okay. Some plants even have the ability to poison other plants. Okay? Anyone have an evergreen growing in their front yard? Okay? You ever notice that very little grows underneath it? Yeah. Okay? Part of that is because it shades out everything, but actually the bigger reason is when the needles fall off, they're acidic. Okay? And they make the ground around the tree so acidic that other plants can't grow. Right? The pine trees themselves can survive that because it's their own material, okay? But other plants do not grow well in that acidic type of soil. So you typically don't see a lot of undergrowth under spruce trees and things like that. All right, so the program for the development of a plant remains somewhat plastic. Their end shape is not fixed like ours. All right, we know that when we are kind of grown up adult, we know what our shape is going to be. 2 arms, 2 legs, okay, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and all that kind of stuff, okay? Unless, of course, we meet with some unfortunate accident along the way, okay? But generally, our end shape is fixed, okay? But for a plant, I could have 2 genetically identical plants, and they'll end up looking very, very different, okay? Case in point, plant on the left up there, plant on the right up there. Those are genetically identical plants, all right? I know that because this one was grown from a cutting of this one. Right? Do they look the same? Their leaf structure is similar because they're growing in the same place, but because I turn one of them all the time and I leave the other one facing the same way all the time, one's grown only on one side and the other's grown fairly evenly all around. Those 2 plants over there, also genetically identical. Right? Why? Because every time they get too tall and fall over, I cut them off and stick them back in the ground. All right? Well, one pot got too full, so I started moving it over to another pot. All of those stalks of that, whatever that plant is called, okay, are all genetically identical. Okay, do they all look the same? No. Okay, they look similar, but they don't all look the same. Okay, because some of them get turned, some of them don't. Okay, so it all depends on your environment. Okay, your environment as a plant is your biggest factor in what your end shape is going to look like. Okay, we call that the nature-nurture argument. Okay, a lot of people do research on how that affects people. Okay, the nature versus nurture argument. They look at identical twins separated at birth. Okay, and see what kind of things they have in common when they're an adult. Okay, and what kind of things they have different. You guys ever seen that? Some of the stuff, I read some studies when I was in psychology in university. Some of the stuff is really weird. Like people separated at birth, raised in entirely different homes, and they were driving the same kind and color of car as an adult. Okay, so there's a lot of that nature stuff, and then there's a lot of the one. If you look at this first episode of the season of CSI, one guy was an axe murderer and the other guy was normal. Okay, that could be the nurture argument. Okay, kind of a thing, right? Everyone follow me there? For plants, obviously, there's no axe murderer plants, but okay, they can be very different, even though they are very closely genetically related. All right. So, houseplant on a windowsill is naturally going to grow towards the light. We call that phototropism. Okay, tropism is a growth towards or a growth pattern. Photo means light. Okay, so this is growth pattern in response to light. Okay, so you can see here, obviously the light source for these plants is located over here somewhere, because that's where all the leaves are facing. Okay, in a forest or other natural ecosystem where plants may be crowded, phototropism directs seedlings towards the sunlight, that is, up. Okay, it's what makes plants tall. Generally, up is the best way to get into the sun. Okay, now this and other types of growth are controlled by plant hormones. Now, obviously, the hormones are chemically like the hormones in our body. They're proteins that send chemical signals to cells to do certain things. But they're not produced in the same way ours are. We have specialized glands in our body that produce certain hormones. Okay, you got your pituitary gland that sits underneath your hypothalamus. Okay, and secretes hormones that tell your other glands what to do. Okay, you've got your adrenal glands that sit right on top of your kidneys. Okay, that secrete adrenaline. You've got your pancreas that secretes insulin. Okay, you've got your your reproductive glands. Okay, so if you're a lady, you've got ovaries and they produce estrogen and stuff like that. If you're a guy, you've got testes that produce testosterone and stuff like that. Okay, we have glands in our body that produce different hormones. Plants don't have glands. Every cell in their body is capable of producing all the hormones it needs. Okay, everybody follow me there? Okay, so every every cell in the plant is capable of altering its growth through the use of hormones. Okay, so 5 major classes of plant hormones are the ones we're going to look at here. Okay, and it's important to know the names of each one and how they affect the plant. All right, looking at these little bean sprouts or alfalfa sprouts, whatever these are. Okay, what are they growing in response to? Do you suppose? Light. Okay, the light source is probably over here somewhere. Okay, so most of the sprouts are growing that way. Why are these two here at the back not doing that so much? Okay, if the light source is here, this one got into the light by growing upwards and backwards. Okay, did it have to grow less to do it that way than it would have if it had to do this? Which would have been less growth? This one, right? This was the way it actually went was less growth than trying to bend and get over top of these other plants. By growing out here to the back, it got a better angle on the sunlight. Okay, that's a growth response, phototropism. Okay, trying to find your way to the light. All right. Okay, auxins are the first type of plant hormone that we're going to go over. All right, auxins are essentially plant growth hormone. All right, you've probably heard of HGH, human growth hormone. Well, auxins are PGH, plant growth hormone. Okay, they make the plant get longer. Not so much the plant, but each individual cell that secretes it. All right, so these cause a lengthening of the cells within a plant. If the cells within the plant get longer, the plant itself must also get longer. Now, that can be used to make the plant taller, but it can also be used to change the plant's shape. Okay? If a plant needs to bend, it will use this stuff, but it'll use it in this way. Okay? If the plant needs to bend, okay, it's got cells on the inside here. Okay? It's not supposed to look like an alligator's mouth, by the way. It's got cells out here. All right? If it wants to bend like this, which cells does it need to make grow faster, outside or inside? The outside. Because if these cells grow faster on the outside than the ones on the inside, they force the plant to bend like this. Okay? And that will allow the plant to get around obstacles. Okay? Like in phototropism, or if it gets knocked over in geotropism, okay, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Okay? A growth response to gravity that helps the plant regain its balance without uprooting itself. Okay? So auxins are typically used, okay, for that. They secrete, the cells on the outside will secrete more than the cells on the inside. They'll grow faster and bend the plant. All right, now, single most important function of auxins is to stimulate elongation. Okay, that means getting longer, okay, of cells in young developing shoots. So, is this going to work, let's say, on a tree at the base of the trunk? No, a plant is not going to bend at a part of the plant that's already mature. Okay, it's only going to be able to make this happen in its new growth. All right, and that's typically why if you look at some trees that maybe have been knocked over, and I think I have a picture of one here, hang on. Yeah, this tree right here, it's hard to see, but the trunk of the tree looks like this. Okay, so that tree probably got knocked over by a rock slide or something. All right, and it would have done that maybe when it was only about this tall. So in order to preserve itself from tipping over, okay, it would have started growing its new stuff in this pattern, trying to grow back out over its roots to get its center of mass back over the part of it that supports it. Okay, and that'll help it to remain balanced. Right? But obviously, it didn't bend down here. This part of the tree is already mature. It can't do anything about the shape of this part of the tree, but it can change the shape of its new growth and cause that to bend. Everybody follow me there? Okay, so auxins only work in kind of new development growth. Okay, auxins can also be used to trick a plant into thinking that it's been pollinated. Okay, so if we want to create seedless fruit, how many people like seedless watermelon, seedless oranges and stuff? Okay, I mean grapes especially, right? No one likes biting into a grape and finding the hard pit in the middle, right? Well, what they do is they spray a very dilute form of auxin. It's artificial, but they spray it onto the flowers, onto the blossoms. Okay, and the reaction on the flowers is that it thinks pollen has landed on the female part of the plant. Okay, so you're getting a lesson here in the birds and bees of plants. Okay, so if you have a flower, the flower in the middle has kind of a vase-shaped structure in the middle of the flower. Right, so the petals and stuff would be kind of over here. Okay, like so. Kind of back in there. So this thing sticks out of the middle of the flower. Everybody with me there? Okay, now, when pollen normally lands on this part, okay, this is called the stigma, okay, when the pollen lands on the stigma, a little reaction happens here that creates a little tube that goes down to this part, which is the ovary, okay? Plants have ovaries. They're in the flowers, okay? Now, coming up, plants are, by the way, hermaphroditic. They have male and female parts. Okay, you probably also noticed that there's these kind of weird shaped things that come up kind of around that in a flower. If you've ever looked closely at a flower, these are the anthers. They're the male parts of the plant. They have the pollen on them. Okay, in every pollen grain is a plant sperm. Okay, every pollen grain contains plant sperm. So when they land on here, they create this little tube, and the sperm swims down the little tube to the ovary, where the egg is fertilized. When the egg is fertilized, the plant can now make a seed, and it encases it in fruit. Okay, the fruit is designed to have the seeds be spread out, right? Okay, animals come along, eat the fruit. Right, we talked about this already, right? They eat the fruit, and then they take the fruit elsewhere, and they poop it out, and then the seeds are in the poop, right? Okay, so this is how this process happens. But if you spray the blossoms with a very dilute form of artificial auxin, you trick the plant into thinking this process has happened. So it makes a fruit, but there hasn't been any fertilization, so there's no seed. Okay, you just get the fruit and no seed. All right, here's the problem. The stuff they use to do that is known as 2,4-D. It's the stuff that's in weed and feed. It's a herbicide in large amounts. Okay. In fact, it's such a good herbicide that it was used on this area in Southeast Asia in about 1969, 1970. What area in Southeast Asia would they have been wanting to kill large amounts of jungle in 1969-70? Yes, during the Vietnam War. Okay, during the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong, which were the communist soldiers from Vietnam and China, okay, were at war with the American soldiers, and they would come out of nowhere in the jungle and ambush the American soldiers and kill them. Well, this was, of course, undesirable. Okay, you don't like getting killed generally. So they said, if you're going to hide in the jungle, we're going to take away the jungle. Right? So what they did is they flew these helicopters over that had big tanks and sprayer arms on them, and they sprayed this stuff called Agent Orange all over the jungle. Okay? Agent Orange is the same stuff chemically that we use to kill dandelions in our lawns today. Right? It works very, very well on broad-leafed plants, but it leaves grass alone because grass has very thin leaves. Okay? So the stuff gets absorbed through the leaves, it goes in, it poisons the plant and kills it off. Right? But essentially what it is an artificial auxin, and it makes the plant grow itself to death. Okay, it essentially gives it kind of like cancer, and it just makes it grow out of control until it dies. Okay, everybody with? Have you ever seen what a dandelion looks like after it gets sprayed? It gets kind of like coily and long, and kind of stringy looking, because it's growing faster than it can supply. Okay, with its roots and photosynthesis, and it just grows itself to death. Okay, and so that's what's happened here. This is the same place, a few weeks apart. Okay, it was very effective. Problem is, in the Vietnam War, as with all things kind of army thinking, more is better. So they sprayed this stuff on way more concentrated than it needed to be, and they sprayed it over everything, including their own soldiers. And if you inhale this stuff, it's very bad for you. Of course, they didn't know it at the time, but if you inhale this stuff, it later developed lung cancer and things like that. I mean, if it can kill plants by essentially giving them cancer, of course it's going to do a similar thing to people. Okay, so lots of civilians were killed by this. Their livestock died. Okay, a lot of soldiers later on developed cancers and things like that from this stuff being sprayed on. So it's not a very good stuff. But in dilute quantities, it'll make seedless fruit. I'm not one of those I've got to have everything organic, but yeah, I don't know if I want seedless fruit that bad. Okay, something to think about anyway. All right, now if you look here, this is one of the other effects here of auxins being applied to a plant. This is the wild, so controlled version. Okay, and you can see that it has normal roots and a fair amount and very little above ground growth. It's got some leaves and it's got kind of one shoot here. But look at the type that was given additional auxin. You can see why this would in short order kill a plant. It's got next to no roots and all this shoot growth. Okay, it's just simply not able to supply with nutrients and water all of this growth, and the plant very quickly dies. Okay. All right, so auxins, like we said, stimulate elongation of cells and developing shoots. Okay, cytokinins. Cytokinins cause cytokinesis, which is cell division. Okay, so cytokinins stimulate cell division. This is what keeps plants young, or allows them to live to be very, very old, whichever way you want to look at it. Right? There's no way an animal ever lives to be thousands of years old. There are lots of plants that can. Okay? The oldest living organism on Earth is this tree in a national park in California named Methuselah. Okay? And it is somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 years old. All right? Its location is a guarded secret. Right? Because they don't want people to go out there and kill it, because there's people that would get their jollies by doing stuff like that. Okay? But it's a very, very old plant. The reason plants can get so old is they're constantly replacing their cells. As their cells age, they just replace them with new ones. All right? We as animals don't really have that ability. Certainly our cells divide and they replace each other, but there comes a point where certain structures on our DNA start to make mistakes after so many cell divisions, and eventually that leads to the deterioration of our tissue and eventually death. Okay? But that process doesn't happen nearly as fast in plants because they have the ability to continue to generate and continue to divide and replace their old cells. Okay? Their cells essentially don't age as quickly as ours. Yes, all cells have DNA. Yeah. All right, so cytokinins allow that to happen. You can see here, this is kind of the normal type of leaf from this particular plant, and this is one that was tagged, essentially given way more cytokinins. You can see that the leaf and tissue development is off the chart. Okay, there's just way more of it because there's way more cells being produced, okay, and something like that. Now, obviously, the first thought of scientists when they discovered this stuff in plants was, we got to make that happen in people because then we could live a really long time. But what's uncontrolled cell growth in humans? Cancer, yeah, that's what it caused in all the animal tests, so obviously that doesn't work very well. Okay, it's something that works fine for plants, but the way our chromosomes work, at the end of your chromosomes, so if we're looking at, let's say, typical kind of X-shaped chromosome, okay, near the joining points of your chromosomes you have something called telomeres, and each time a cell divides, those telomeres get shorter and smaller, and eventually they get kind of used up, and at that point that's where you start to kind of break down and mistakes start getting made in the cell division and tissue degrades and you age and die. Okay? But in plants, that doesn't seem to happen quite as much. Okay? And part of that is these cytokinins. All right. Gibberellins. Okay, gibberellins are mostly produced in roots and young leaves, not so much in the shoots. Okay, what they allow is, well, that's where they're produced, but their effect is actually in the places they're not produced. Gibberellins stimulate growth in both the leaves and the stem, but they have little effect on root growth. Oddly, that's where they're produced, but they seem to get transported through the xylem with the water, and they affect stem growth quite a bit. Okay, so in stems, gibberellins stimulate cell elongation and cell division. So this is kind of a generalized plant hormone. Okay, that's typically used to gain quick growth, but not a lot of shape change. Like auxins can really change the shape of a plant. Okay, but they're only produced near the ends. This stuff can be produced more in the shoots. Now, if there's too much of it, obviously too much of anything is a bad thing, right? So if we're looking here at these two types of rice, okay, this type of rice here on the left is normal rice. This rice here has what the Chinese call foolish seedling disease. Okay? And it is caused by a fungus that grows on the root of the rice plants. Okay? And what it does is it causes an overproduction of gibberellins. Now, you might think, well, that's not so bad. The plant will just get really tall. But here's the problem. You can't get really tall and not get wider. Because if you get tall without girth, what'll happen? Yeah, you'll tip over. The stem will break. Okay. Yeah, as you grow in your primary direction, you also have to grow in your secondary direction. It's called primary growth and secondary growth. Okay. Gibberellins promote primary growth, but not secondary growth. And so the plants get tall, and then a wind comes up, bends them all over, and they break, and then they die. Okay. Foolish seedlings. They don't want them to grow so fast. Okay, so gibberellins under normal conditions will cause, a little bit more fruit production, okay, more dense leaves but less blossoms, okay, and things like that. All right, questions on gibberellins? Okay, abscisic acid, okay, is an important hormone for plants that have distinct seasonality. Okay, that means that they either have a wet and a dry season, or they have summer and winter. All right. If you're in a tropical rainforest, abscisic acid is probably not all that big a deal for you because your weather is pretty much the same all year. It's wet and hot. Okay. But in Canada, our plants need to overwinter. Okay. So what abscisic acid does is it prepares a plant for dormancy. Now, this is also produced in plants that have to endure a long dry season. So if you were in the savanna of Africa, a lot of plants will estivate there as well. Okay, they'll go dormant because it's so hot and so dry for so long. All right. Now, in Canada, what happens is as the days get shorter, plants can detect the change in day length. How do you suppose they detect that? Right. Their rate of photosynthesis, their production of sugars decreases. And when that happens, they have this sort of internal sensor that says, yeah, you know what, when the days get shorter, it starts to get colder. Okay, and so we better go dormant now. All right, that's why even though we got that wicked snowstorm there at the beginning of September, all right, it didn't really alter when the leaves changed. They still changed at the same time. Third week of September is when they really start to really go. All right, temperature has no effect on that. All right, just the presence of this chemical. Now, what this chemical does, okay, like we said, slows down growth of a plant and makes it assume a more dormant state. How does it do that? It interrupts the production of chlorophyll. Okay? Abscisic acid essentially cuts the pathway that cells use to make chlorophyll. When they can't make chlorophyll, they can't carry out photosynthesis, and then they stop transporting water, sugar stops running in the phloem, plant assumes a dormant state. Okay, now it's ready for winter. Everybody follow me there? Yes? Okay. All right, ethylene. Ethylene is a gas that is produced by plants naturally that causes the ripening of fruit. Okay, it also causes the senescence, okay, or aging and death of plants. All right, so if you are looking at like annual plants like tomatoes that only grow for one season, this will signal them to essentially die. All right, if it's a perennial plant that grows back every year, it will help to signal dormancy along with abscisic acid. Once you've produced fruit, what else do you need to do as a plant? The answer is nothing. Okay, you've produced offspring, or at least seeds. Okay, and so now you can go dormant. Your job is done. All right, and so once the plants have produced fruit and the fruit has started to ripen, the plant knows it's time to start producing abscisic acid and go dormant, prepare. Okay, for that kind of thing. So, how many people grow tomatoes at home? Okay, a few of you, right? And this year, because of that snow, you had to pick them off when they were green, probably. Well, I mean, who cares? Like any year, you got to pick them off green. We live in Canada, okay? If it frosts, as soon as it frosts, your tomatoes are dead. So you got to take those off, okay? And I know I had like 3 buckets full in my kitchen that were all green, okay? And I don't like waiting because I'm kind of impatient. So what I do is I throw an apple in each one of the buckets, a ripe apple, because what's the ripe apple releasing? Ethylene. Okay, and that ethylene will cause the ripening of any fruit around it. Ever notice how if you put a banana in with anything, everything else spoils? Okay, and then of course bananas, they ripen really, really fast, right? Okay, you guys have heard of the banana principle before? If you buy them green, you'll eat them before they're ripe. If you buy them ripe, they'll be black before you eat them. Okay, it's kind of like Murphy's Law applied to bananas. Right? Because bananas produce more ethylene gas than any other fruit. Okay? Like if I really wanted my tomatoes to ripen, I'd throw a banana in there. Except that in 2 days I'd have nothing but rotten tomatoes. Right? Because bananas just produce that much ethylene gas. Right? That's why some bananas you can actually buy in those little green bags. Okay, they come in a special green bag that has an interior lining on it that absorbs ethylene gas and keeps them from ripening too fast. Okay, so there's some technology out there that allows that, okay, to happen. The best way to get tomatoes to ripen with other than an apple is to leave the sepals on. The sepals are the small leaves right at the base, okay, that are kind of sometimes stuck to the stem that attaches the tomato to the plant. Those are called sepals. They are actually the site of the most ethylene production, okay, and so if you leave them on, it will help it to ripen a little bit more. All right, that's why it's you don't often see in the store. You can sometimes buy tomatoes that are still on the vine, but most of the time when you buy tomatoes, all the green parts have been removed because they want them to last a long time, right? They don't want them to go rotten before they're purchased. All right, so ethylene ripens fruit. Okay, that's the big thing that it does. All right, tropisms. So the growth patterns in the plants. Now we got to look at what do the hormones do here to make plants grow. All right, first thing they do, okay, they can result in curvatures. Anything that's a tropism is going to result in the curvature, okay, the changing in shape of the plant. Okay, and that's going to be either towards or away from stimuli, right? If we've got positive phototropism, that's going to be growth toward or away from light. Toward. Negative phototropism is growth away. You don't often see that unless the light source is like glaringly bright and it's too intense for the plant. All right. The mechanism for tropism is a differential rate of growth of cells on opposite sides of the organ. Now that could be leaves, shoots, roots, whatever. That's why we say organs. It means part of the plant. Okay. Now, why would this plant do this? Well, but I mean, this plant's not shaded by anything, right? If it grew straight out, it would still get light, wouldn't it? So why would it do this? What is it growing in response to? Gravity. Plants naturally grow up because that's generally where the light source is. But if you're a plant that's growing on a forest floor, you don't get light because everything else is bigger than you and it's shading you out. So you don't know where the light is. You can't use phototropism to get to the light. So you have to use gravity to tell you where light is, and light is generally up. Okay? So plants have a sense of where up is, right? And they will generally grow in that direction. They've done some experiments with this on the International Space Station where gravity is no longer a factor, and plants just grow entirely towards their light sources. Okay? And they grow, in cases where they're evenly lit from all sides, they grow completely random. Okay? Because there's no gravity to tell them which way is up. Right? So they grow kind of weird. All right. Okay, so geotropism is caused by gravity and can be seen in trees that grow on steep hillsides, right? And this one here you can see a little bit better. The tree trunk of this one is bent a little bit like that, right? Because it probably got knocked over in a rock slide or something, okay, and needed to start growing back upwards. All right, so part of that is to help them find where the light is. The other part of it is balance. All right, if this tree continued to grow out this way, eventually more of its weight would be trying to pull these roots out of the ground, and it would tip over. If it gets more of its weight back over those roots, then it's not going to have so much of a problem. Okay, questions on what geotropism is? Okay, phototropism is caused by the location of light sources. Plant growth towards light. So geo means because of the earth or because of gravity. Okay, phototropism because of light, right? And here's what we were talking about before. It's just a way better diagram than my crocodile mouth diagram there. Okay, on the inside of the plant where there's lots and lots of light, the cells are very small. But on the outside of the plant, we can see that they're a lot longer. These cells, are getting more auxins. And remember that auxins cause lengthening of the cells. Okay, when the cells on the outside of the plant grow faster than the ones on the inside or get longer, okay, it naturally bends the plant. All right, it would be like if you were running on our track. Okay, our track is an oval, right? Okay, if you're in lane 1 and the other person is in lane 8, okay, and you start at exactly the same point, who has to run faster? Yeah, because they've got to go further. It's further around the track in lane 8 if you start at the same place. That's why if you've ever watched a track and field race, there's a staggered start on any race that goes around a corner, right? Because it accounts then for how much further they would run, right? So they stagger them, and then that person gets another 8 meters. They look like they're getting a head start, but they're not really, okay? All right, so these ones grow faster on the outside, and that causes a bending of the plant in the direction of the light. Okay. And then there's the last one, thigmotropism. Thigmotropism is growth response to touch. Okay, some plants are crawlers. Okay, peas, sweet peas, ivy is a crawler. Okay, those plants actually hanging over there are crawlers as well. What some plants can do is when they detect something nearby, they'll grow a little vine around it, a little tendril, okay, around it, and that tendril will support some of their weight. It'll allow them to grow tall without having to waste energy on stuff that can support, okay, on secondary growth to support themselves. They'll just allow whatever they're touching to support them instead, right? And that's why ivy can grow up the sides of buildings, okay? Peas can crawl up your pea fence, right? Usually you put a fence next to peas if you want them to grow tall, otherwise they just grow along the ground, right? So thigmotropism responds to touch, and this is a tendril here, okay? You can see it just grows around kind of twisty, okay, and grabs onto something, in this case the leaf of another plant, okay? Some plants, it's not a tendril like that, it's actually a chemical, all right? And it can dissolve part of the surface that it's growing on, and then it'll stick a tendril into the hole it's made. Ivy does that, okay, to brick. This stuff, I found out the hard way, does that to drywall. Okay, it's got these little brown spots where all the new branches are, and when those come into contact with drywall, it secretes a chemical that dissolves the drywall. Okay, and it can actually stick tendrils into the drywall. I found that out the hard way because I was getting ready to move after I got married, and I picked up my plant that I'd had growing on top of my cupboards in the kitchen. It was actually that plant, and I just picked it up and went to step off, and all of a sudden it didn't come with me, and this big chunk of drywall came out of the wall, and there was it looked like veins behind that drywall. All these little tendrils had gotten through the drywall and into the thing behind. Okay, and then of course now I got a spackle and all this stuff because I'm moving out and someone's bought the house and whatever. It was a big mess. Okay, so you want to watch out for certain types of plants. They eat drywall, okay, to support themselves because it had grown quite a long ways along the top of the cupboard. Yes. Okay, so thigmotropism is stimulated by touch, mostly in vines, okay, some chemical based. All right, I would like you guys to answer those 5 questions here real quick, and then we'll go over them. All right, so why is it that 2 plants that are genetically identical can be different? Right, okay, their environment is bigger influence on their growth than their genetics is. Okay, the end shape of a plant is not genetically predetermined. I mean, certainly leaf shape and color and things like that is somewhat predetermined. Okay, but the overall shape of the plant is not. Okay, number 2, any growth pattern in a plant is referred to as a what? Tropism. All right. Do plants in the tropical rainforest require very much abscisic acid? Right, they don't go dormant. Okay, if you are a tropical rainforest plant and you secrete abscisic acid and go dormant, everyone else will grow over you. All right, while you are dormant. You have no reason to go dormant because it's hot and wet all the time. All right, and so you always have the factors you need. Okay, long exposure to 2,4-D has been shown to produce cancerous tumors in humans. Why might this happen? And also, it produces rapid cell growth as in addition to cell division. Okay. Right. Okay, we've said that there's lots of similarities between plant and animal cells, and most of those have to do with not just structure, but processes as well. Growth is a process that is controlled similarly, okay, between plant and animal cells, and this can have a similar effect. Okay. And number 5, this hormone is involved in the ripening of fruit. Ethylene. Okay, now, so we've seen that getting too many hormones can be bad for a plant. Can getting too many of animal hormones be bad for an animal? Let's say a person. Yeah, okay. Steroids, okay, taking steroids is essentially taking more hormones than you would naturally have in your body. Okay, there are negative side effects. There are obvious benefits, okay? I mean, I'm not going to kid you. If you take steroids, you're going to grow gigantic muscles very quickly if you're working out all the time. Just taking steroids and not working out is going to do you absolutely no good, so don't think there's just a magic pill that's going to freaking make you big, okay? It's not going to work, okay? But if you are taking steroids, you are able to work out more often and with a greater intensity because your cells heal faster, okay? That's essentially, and they grow faster. That's essentially what steroids do for you. Here's the problem. Taking more steroids or hormones than should be naturally present in your body is going to lead to detrimental side effects. Okay? First off, the glands that normally produce those hormones don't need to anymore because your body's always full of them, and they shrink. Think about it. Where's testosterone produced? Okay? Think about it. It happens. Okay? It will shrink, okay, and possibly even become less useful. Okay, steroids can cause impotence in men. Okay, it is a proven fact. It's probably not something you want. Okay, you haven't had children yet, but you may want to at some point. Okay, it can also influence your ability to father children. Okay, as a man, as a woman, if you're taking testosterone, you are going to start to develop secondary male sexual characteristics. Large, strong muscles, probably being the desirable one if you were taking them for that reason, okay? But other undesirable side effects, hair growth, okay, things like that, you'd become a bit mannish, all right? If you look at pictures of like the East German swim team from back in the 80s, yeah, okay, they had quite the steroid program going on in those days, and yeah, a little mannish, okay? By a little, I mean mannish. Okay, yeah, so there are some undesirable side effects for certain. Okay, the other issue is that as steroids carry out what they're supposed to do and natural hormones carry out what they're supposed to do, their waste products from their breakdown are also not all that good for you. So if you're putting them in far larger amounts than you're supposed to have, the organs responsible for cleaning those kinds of things out get overtaxed. Okay, and one of the first types of cancer that usually appears in people who have abused steroids is liver cancer. Okay, especially if they've taken them orally. All right, they will definitely cause a breakdown of any of the organs related to cleaning your blood. All right, and obviously thyroid conditions can also develop from the use of steroids. Okay, it's not all I got big muscles and I look great at the beach. Okay, it's also later in life, not so desirable side effects. Okay, so keep that in mind if you're thinking about that. Okay, they really aren't good for you in the long term. There's lots of other ways you can get stronger without cheating. Okay, because yeah, it's cheating when you do that, and it's not good for you. Right. What was her name? Florence Griffith Joyner. She was a sprinter for the U.S. in the late 80s, early 90s, and she won medals left, right, and center. She was jacked. Okay, she had big mannish muscles. All right, and she didn't get to enjoy all of that for very long because she was dead shortly after 2000 from cancer. Okay, use steroids, you abuse steroids, and it's gonna get you one way or another. You're either gonna get caught, and you're gonna be Lance Armstrong or Jose Canseco or A-Rod or any of those guys. Okay, or what was her name? The other sprinter for the States. I can't remember her name. She got caught too, lost her medals. Okay, you're either gonna get caught or you're gonna die. It's just not a good choice either way. Yeah. All right. So keep all that stuff in mind there, guys. For those, okay. Tomorrow's quiz will be the last one on the cell. All right. I'll post it later on today. Thursday's quiz will be on plant transport and some of this. All right. We're going to go over factors tomorrow that affect growth. Today we went over how the plant grows. Tomorrow we're going to look at what affects its growth. Okay. And we're going to start our transport lab as well. It only takes about 25 minutes to get it set up, and then we'll go through the rest of the stuff tomorrow. Okay.